Hello there. As an early childhood educator, I run into a lot of learning moments with my kiddos. There's something magical about seeing a kid either use their words to stick up for themselves, or learn that, we don't eat paint. And being a learner myself, on the other end of that with grad school and all that, it's a bit harder than learning that I would hope I already don't know how to eat paint. That said, I wish I could be graded on my ability to finger paint or what have you. But the first and most prominent and most recent learning experience that comes to mind is my recent endeavor of tackling two back-to-back capstones at Drexel. These two projects were actually the same project extended over two continuous quarters. For my capstone project, I actually worked for the Drexel University Archives along with Sarah Newhouse, who is an archivist here at Drexel. For the project itself, my objective was to improve the ease of access, the navigation, to clean up the archives using my Python skills, my SQL skills, and I also ended up using something called Postman and a few other things to kind of query their APIs and sandbox and et cetera, et cetera. Basically, I was trying to make their life at Drexel Archives just a little bit easier. As such, the way I learned about this information reflects a combination of learning styles. The first very macro learning theory that I ran into was called constructivism. According to the article by Bush from 2006, constructivism takes place when a learner seeks out their own meanings to things. It happens most naturally when a learner gains experience on their own and through their own efforts, aka trial and error. Through this trial and error comes the second learning theory that helped me along the way, as described in the book by the National Academy of Sciences from 2018, who described what is known as implicit pattern learning. Basically, the learning of patterns and theory argues that, subconsciously or consciously, we're looking out for patterns, and I ask myself questions to figure out how those patterns and pieces to the puzzle fit together. The book argues that this naturally plays out through spoken language. Now, Python isn't per se a language that I speak, but it is a language in itself that it has rules and regulations, and it has, patterns for the things that it likes that doesn't work or no, it doesn't work, kind of like grammar. There are things that work and don't work, right? So through pattern learning here, and through constructivism, trial and error, I'm learning this, language. Every time my code would work or not work, and every time it would work but I wouldn't know why, I would have to ask myself and refigure it out and reimagine things and go back and forth and back and forth. Ultimately, what I learned from this project was not only a base understanding of Drexel Archives, i.e. what they use, its APIs, etc., but I gained a much deeper understanding of Python itself, its proper rules, its syntax, and what works and what doesn't. All this knowledge coming together and forming meanings to trial, error, and definitely plenty of repetition. The final process of learning for this project that I encountered is actually a textbook example of the information processing theory described again in Bush from 2006, who writes, quote, "Learners are viewed as those who acquire, assemble, and retrieve material and in the process make meaningful transformation, the information into knowledge," end quote. So having to craft this code and define meaning on my own, as I've already said, this project really embraces the concept of information processing theory. So basically, my project is like I'm doing it on my own. I'm looking for patterns, but it's much more than just repetition and learning the patterns. I have to then apply meaning, okay? So it's much more than just x plus y equals z. I have to understand why it's z and why the meaning is there. So I'm learning on my own through constructivism. I'm finding the pattern through the pattern learnings, and through information processing, I'm learning for myself what it all means. Okay, that said, all learning styles and methodologies need to be embraced and understood by librarians and information professionals alike. To quote from the International Bureau of Education on what learning is, quote, "Learning is defined as a process that brings together personal and environmental experiences and influences for acquiring, enriching, or modifying one's knowledge, skills, values, attitudes, behaviors, and worldviews," end quote. In other words, learning is shaped by so many things. Like, I learn different than what you've learned. You learn different than somebody from like Russia or China has learned. Everybody has a different way, and it's influenced by our environment, by the things around us, by what we read, what we watch and do. Okay, and as information professionals, it's our job to anybody that comes to us to expect that they have different ways of processing. You know, we can't just look at their information and be like, well, here you go, here's the thing. We have to think. We can ask them questions like, why do you want to learn this? Or what value do you want to get from this? Or what other things might you want to get from this? You know, it's okay to probe, and it's actually it's encouraged. You know, because we want them to be excited, and we want to be excited with them, because they don't want just a stale experience from us. And in conclusion, from my own experience and having taken this class, I know that information can be learned, processed, and presented in many different ways. Just because someone's learning methods are different than mine does not mean that they're bad. You know, we have a saying that the user isn't broken, and I am very, very pro that. Therefore, it's important for me and others to remember, and to remind those that I work with, to always ask questions and to never assume something is wrong or missing information. Like I said, instead, ask for clarity from others and allow them to explain what they mean. When seeking explanations from users' questions, it's infinitely better to assume that they know what they're talking about. From my personal work in data and information analytics, I see myself teaching others who would work with me in a similar way that I have learned. When dealing with a problem involving data, programming, or data visualization and syntax, I would rather I would want them to have a constructivism approach as well. I want them to feel okay asking me questions until we come up with the correct answer. But I want them to feel okay, give them pieces of the code, give them pieces of the puzzle, let them be excited, but to draw their own meaning and to come to their own conclusion. And then just have them feel okay about asking questions and encourage them to come up with their own learning.